Yul Brynner stood motionless in the doorway of the Paramount Studios executive conference room, watching a nameless studio director tear apart the dignity of one of Hollywood's most beloved actresses, with the casual cruelty that characterized men whose temporary authority had convinced them that talent could be discarded like yesterday's newspapers, knowing that some insults demanded responses that transcended professional courtesy and entered territory where personal honor required immediate action regardless of career consequences. March 1956, 2:15 in the afternoon, when Deborah Kerr's luminous screen presence was being dismissed as too old for romantic leads by a man half her age whose credentials consisted of one mediocre film and connections to studio executives who valued compliance over competence, and the King of Siam was about to demonstrate why authentic nobility protected those who deserve protection even when silence would have been safer for everyone involved. If you're fascinated by untold stories where Hollywood's greatest stars revealed their true character through moments of moral courage that defended dignity against institutional cruelty, subscribe for more hidden encounters where legendary friendships were forged through acts of chivalry that changed industry attitudes toward women who had given their best years to entertaining ungrateful audiences. The mahogany-paneled conference room represented everything magnificent and corrupt about Hollywood's golden age, where careers could be elevated or destroyed through conversations occurring behind closed doors. The Persian carpets, crystal chandeliers, and oil paintings created an atmosphere of old-world elegance that barely concealed ruthless business calculations determining which dreams would be realized and which talents discarded. Deborah Kerr sat with perfect posture facing the conference table, her grace intact despite the verbal assault she had endured from director Harold Westbrook, whose recent success with one romantic comedy had convinced him that he possessed authority to evaluate actresses whose careers had spanned decades. At 34, Kerr remained one of Hollywood's most beautiful and accomplished actresses, her Scottish refinement and professionalism having made her the first choice for roles requiring dramatic depth and romantic appeal. But Westbrook had decided her age made her unsuitable for romantic leads, delivering this assessment with brutal honesty that men mistook for business acumen when it was actually institutionalized cruelty disguised as commercial pragmatism. The simple fact, Miss Kerr, Westbrook continued with satisfaction of someone who believed delivering painful truths elevated him above sentimental considerations, is that audiences want fresh faces in romantic roles, not actresses who remind them of their mortality through visible signs of aging. The assessment was delivered with cold calculation that characterized men who had reduced human beings to commercial commodities and convinced themselves this represented sophisticated market understanding rather than moral bankruptcy. Your technical skills remain adequate, Westbrook acknowledged with condescending generosity that made his critique more devastating than outright insults. But romantic leads require actresses who embody youth and possibility, rather than reminding audiences of time's passage through subtle signs of age that camera close-ups make impossible to disguise. Kerr maintained her composure with professionalism that had made her beloved throughout the industry, though careful observers could detect slight tightening around her eyes, revealing how deeply the criticism affected someone whose identity was built around bringing characters to life through abilities transcending mere physical appearance. The cruelty was particularly devastating because it struck at every actress's deepest fear, that her value would be reduced to physical attributes that time inevitably altered, regardless of how much her talent had improved through years of dedication to craft. "I understand your concerns about commercial viability," Kerr replied with diplomatic courtesy. "Perhaps we could discuss alternative approaches that would address your marketing concerns while utilizing the experience I've gained through similar roles." The professional response was designed to salvage the meeting through compromise, but her diplomatic approach only encouraged his belief that she was desperate enough to accept whatever terms he offered. "I'm afraid the issue isn't characterization but fundamental casting philosophy," Westbrook replied with finality that characterized men who had mistaken obstinacy for leadership. Modern audiences demand actresses who embody vitality and promise rather than reminding them of mothers or wives who have lost the bloom of youth. The brutal assessment revealed Hollywood's institutionalized ageism and casual cruelty with which talented women were discarded when they no longer served the industry's obsession with youth and physical perfection that had nothing to do with acting ability. Kerr felt something inside her break at that moment, not just professional disappointment, but profound sadness from realizing that decades of dedication meant nothing to men who saw her only as commodity, whose value could be calculated through market research rather than artistic contribution or human dignity. That's when the conference room atmosphere changed in ways everyone present would remember as education about the difference between temporary authority and authentic power. "Gentlemen," came a quiet voice from the doorway, carrying controlled authority that made casual conversation sound like royal proclamation. "I couldn't help but overhear your evaluation of Miss Kerr's suitability for romantic roles, and I find your analysis both fascinating and profoundly ignorant of what constitutes authentic beauty and professional excellence." Every head turned toward Yul Brynner as he entered, with movements so controlled they seemed choreographed by someone who understood that true authority required no announcement beyond simple presence commanding attention through dignity. At 36, Yul possessed magnetic presence that made other men suddenly aware of their limitations, his compact frame radiating intensity that filled rooms and made observers understand why kings and pharaohs had been his signature roles rather than mere acting assignments. For Kerr, his appearance felt like salvation arriving precisely when hope had been extinguished, someone whose moral courage she had witnessed before, and whose protective instincts she knew could be counted upon when lesser men revealed their character through casual cruelty. "Mr. Brynner," Westbrook replied with careful courtesy that characterized interactions with stars whose box office appeal made them untouchable, "I didn't realize you were scheduled to join this meeting." "I wasn't scheduled to join," Yul replied immediately, his accented voice cutting through conference room air with precision that made every word seem individually selected for maximum impact. "But I happened to be passing when I heard what can only be described as one of the most ignorant assessments of feminine beauty and professional excellence that I have encountered in 20 years. The criticism was delivered without raised voice, simply professional evaluation from someone whose experience included working with legendary actresses who understood that authentic talent transcended superficial considerations." "I'm sure you're entitled to your opinion about casting decisions," Westbrook replied carefully. "But commercial realities require practical assessments of audience expectations, rather than sentimental attachments to performers whose best years may be behind them." "Commercial realities," Yul repeated with something that might have been amusement if it hadn't carried undertones of genuine anger being controlled through considerable self-discipline. "You're discussing commercial realities while dismissing one of the most talented and beautiful actresses in Hollywood as too old for romantic roles, which suggests your understanding of both commerce and reality is severely limited by inexperience and poor judgment." He moved closer with steps carrying precision that conveyed authority that couldn't be challenged by men whose position depended on institutional support rather than personal capability. "Miss Kerr," Yul continued, turning toward Deborah with courtly manner that characterized his interactions with women whose talent deserved recognition rather than casual dismissal, "would you mind if I shared my perspective on Mr. Westbrook's evaluation of your suitability for romantic leading roles?" The question was delivered with formal courtesy that revealed genuine respect for her autonomy, understanding that defending her dignity required her consent, rather than assuming protection could be imposed without consultation. "I would welcome your thoughts," Kerr replied with grateful recognition that someone was finally treating her as professional equal rather than commercial commodity whose value could be assessed through superficial criteria. The relief in her voice was carefully controlled, but unmistakable to anyone who understood how devastating the previous conversation had been, to someone whose career was built on bringing complex characters to life through abilities that transcended physical appearance. "Mr. Westbrook," Yul said, his attention returning to the director with focused intensity that made the younger man aware he was being evaluated by someone whose standards were considerably more demanding than studio executives. "Your assessment of Miss Kerr's age as liability rather than asset reveals fundamental ignorance about what constitutes authentic beauty and romantic appeal that suggests you should reconsider your qualifications for making decisions about casting actresses in any roles." The criticism was delivered with devastating precision that left no room for misinterpretation about Yul's assessment of Westbrook's competence. Women like Miss Kerr possess something that 20-year-old starlets cannot provide and never will develop if they lack the intelligence and character that creates authentic magnetism, Yul continued, his voice gaining intensity. She possesses sophistication, wisdom, grace, and understanding of emotional complexity that allows her to portray romantic relationships with depth and authenticity that makes audiences believe in love, rather than simply witnessing physical attraction. The defense was both passionate and intellectual, revealing deep appreciation for qualities that superficial industry evaluation consistently undervalued in favor of characteristics that photographed well but couldn't sustain careers or create memorable performances. Furthermore, Yul added, his controlled anger becoming more apparent, any man who considers 34-year-old woman too old for romantic roles reveals more about his own limitations and inexperience than about audience preferences or commercial viability. The personal attack was delivered with surgical precision that made Westbrook understand his evaluation of Kerr's worth was being turned back on him through methods that questioned not just his professional judgment, but his fundamental understanding of what made women attractive to sophisticated audiences. Miss Kerr represents everything that is elegant, intelligent, and genuinely beautiful about womanhood, Yul declared with conviction that brooked no argument. Any director who fails to recognize her value or considers her unsuitable for romantic roles is revealing his own inadequacy rather than identifying problems with her capability. The final assessment was delivered with authority that transformed the entire meeting from business discussion into moral evaluation. Where Westbrook's competence and character were being measured against standards his previous success hadn't prepared him to meet. The conference room fell silent as everyone absorbed what they had witnessed. Not merely professional disagreement about casting, but fundamental challenge to the industry's treatment of talented women and men, whose authority was based on position rather than genuine understanding. Westbrook's face flushed with embarrassment and anger as he realized his authority provided no protection against criticism that questioned his fundamental competence and revealed his assessment of Kerr as evidence of poor judgment rather than business acumen. "I think this meeting is concluded," Westbrook announced stiffly. "Indeed it is." Yul agreed with satisfaction that didn't entirely conceal continued anger. "And I trust that future discussions of Miss Kerr's suitability for roles will be conducted with appropriate recognition of her talent, professionalism, and the kind of authentic beauty that creates careers lasting decades." Years later, Kerr would describe that afternoon as one of the most meaningful moments of her Hollywood career, not because it led to specific roles, but because someone had recognized her worth when industry executives were treating her as disposable commodity. Yul understood something that many men in this industry never learn. Kerr would tell interviewers, "Real beauty and romantic appeal aren't diminished by age when they're based on qualities that go deeper than physical appearance and include intelligence, grace, and understanding of emotional truth that can only be developed through experience and maturity." Their friendship, forged through that moment of chivalrous protection, would endure throughout both careers and serve as example of loyalty and mutual respect that transcended normal professional relationships to become genuine affection based on shared values and recognition of authentic quality that couldn't be manufactured or replaced regardless of changing fashion or commercial pressures favoring youth over experience. Some authority was temporary and based on position that could be lost through poor judgment or changing circumstances. Other power was permanent and derived from character that commanded respect through consistent demonstration of principles that elevated everyone within its influence and created loyalty lasting lifetimes, rather than disappearing when usefulness ended or better opportunities emerged. In the years that followed, Kerr would continue to receive magnificent roles that showcased her mature beauty and sophisticated acting ability, while Westbrook's career would remain limited to mediocre projects that never achieved the artistic recognition he believed his authority deserved. The difference between authentic talent protected by genuine friendship and manufactured power exercised without wisdom had been demonstrated in ways that Hollywood observers would remember whenever discussions turned to the treatment of women in an industry that too often confused youth with value and position with genuine authority. Some authority was temporary and based on position that could be lost through poor judgment or changing circumstances. Other power was permanent and derived from character that commanded respect through consistent demonstration of principles that elevated everyone within its influence and created loyalty that lasted lifetimes, rather than disappearing when usefulness ended or better opportunities emerged.